This is a story about a woman using all her abilities to complete a spy mission and also get exactly what she wants.
Bronwyn kind of deciding for herself what to do with her body, what to do with her mind, where to put her focus is such a mark of a true feminist, I think, and also of someone who has power and agency.
Yeah. I think it's very sexy.
Oh, it's so sexy.
That's narrator Helen Day talking about the sexy and determined characters she narrated as Hedra Knight. We're talking about The Duke in Question by Amalie Howard on this Desideratum. A desideratum is an essential thing. I'm audiobook narrator Teresa Bakken, and I think this story is full of essential things. Before we begin, I want to sincerely thank this episode's sponsor, Dreamscape Media. Thanks to Dreamscape, you'll hear several fun moments from the audiobook. Dreamscape is an independent, award-winning audiobook publisher. I'll give you a way to get best-selling audiobook deals and giveaways from them after our conversation, where we talk with a professional narrator about getting physically into character, playing scenes with a variety of action and spice, and how performing world tours with Cirque du Soleil were part of her storytelling journey. We'll start with what excited Helen Day about narrating author Amalie Howard's The Duke in Question.
There's a lot of strong female characters, right?
There really are, yeah. And here's the thing, when I was approached by the publisher to narrate this, it was outside of anything I'd narrated before. So, I was kind of like, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll do this. And I read it, and that's one of the things that really impressed me was just the number of really strong female characters, the kind of feminist slant that the book takes without driving it home too heavily. It just kind of has this really sort of modern feel to it while being very firmly, it's a very firmly historical book, but it has this kind of fresh feel to it. And that was one of the main reasons why I was like, absolutely, I would love to narrate this.
Yeah, and I loved that this author, that she anchors into some real things. So some intrigue and romance, and it sort of, it whisks you away. But she makes references to John Wilkes Booth. She's talking about, this period of time during the Civil War in the United States. Her characters cross paths with actual spies of the time. And I thought that was really clever. That was a nod to historical fiction that also I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, and again, it sort of gives it more it feels very genuine and authentic.
Yeah.
While also, as you say, allowing us to kind of take this flight of fantasy.
Yes.
So it's not like, oh, we're just sort of a nod to history and then we'll just have this frou-frou story around that at all. It feels like we get to sort of live in this time period, experience some of the characters from this time period, whilst also being on this amazing fantasy journey.
Pasting a demure smile on her lips, she turned and took him in up close. Fitted bespoke clothing, tremendous height, he practically towered over her smaller form. Those angular cheekbones, hooded golden eyes, and lush mouth all conspired to make her lungs squeeze. His pale skin took on the silvery gleam of the moonlight, making him appear more chimerical than he should be, some fantastical, sultry spectre from her imagination come to taunt her. She'd take that option if it meant she didn't have to speak to him, but alas, he was indeed real. Your Grace, what a surprise! A thoroughly unwelcome one. He leaned against the railing and perused her. It is, isn't it?
Yes. And she does have grit. She has some courage about her, this main character. But you, as the narrator, you have to be in her head, wrapped really around her character. Like the author does these things where you have sort of asides. There'll be little bits of like her voice in her head versus what she's actually saying out loud. So you had to really adopt her character, not just her voice, but like a persona of her. And then the author switches, and
Yes, she does.
We're also seeing the perspective from this Duke's mind.
Yeah. Which again, I found really exciting because we kind of have this duality going on throughout the story where, we're very firmly, I think, on seeing the world through Bronwyn's point of view.
Yeah.
But then we kind of get to look back at her through the Duke's point of view. And that's really exciting because we can sort of see, I don't want to give too much away, but, she's presenting as this high society girl, sort of, ready to be wed, etc. But at the same time, she's living this life as a double agent. I mean, that's sort of on page 1, so I'm not giving too much away there. When we get to see how good she is, because he's looking back at her going, wait, things don't quite add up. And sort of he's piecing her together. And I think that only serves to embellish and enrich her character. And also, he is the Duke in question. And we get to then sort of really enjoy and learn more about him. He's not a sort of one-dimensional character at all. He's got such richness and so many layers. And
Right.
by the same token, she has certain impressions of him that she's sort of projecting onto him. And we know a little more than she does. We know a little more than he does. So as the reader or as the listener, we feel, I don't know, we feel like we're getting to really glimpse into all angles of this world. And we know a few secrets that characters don't, which is kind of quite a nice position to be in.
Yes. That's a great way to describe it. We are kind of looking down on it, but then we're also looking through her eyes and then looking through his eyes. But I think that presents a lot of challenges in an audible version, right? Like if the reader with the printed page is able to sort of skip around. And so how did you approach that? Being, trying to create an audio version of all of those views for the listener.
I mean, for me, I come from an acting background. And for me, it's always about trying to kind of sink into the shoes of that character. Not necessarily, obviously, narration's different from acting in that I'm not trying to be that character, but I have to sink into that point of view. So, for example, making the switch between narrating from Bronwyn's point of view and narrating from the Duke's point of view, there's a different kind of stance I take mentally and physically that then becomes reflected in the narration. So for me, it's really kind of trying to flesh out that character more in my mind and then be in that point of view and be in the kind of the physicalization of the character and the point of view of the character. Yeah.
Okay, so if I had a camera into your studio, what would I see you like holding your posture, literally holding your posture differently and holding your face differently? Or like, is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. And it wouldn't be as marked as if, say I was on stage and I was playing these two characters, there'd be a huge shift in face, in stance, in, the way I walked and talked. So it's not that, but it's a version of that whereby, Bronwyn perhaps is a little more sort of shoulders back and eyes wide, and she's also she's got more secrets because she's playing different sides of herself to get what she wants. And then the Duke, is sort of written as a little more kind of world weary and cynical. So there's slightly more of a furrowed brow to him. There's more of a sort of definitely he is 2 feet flat on the floor. And that already, even as I'm talking about them, that changes my voice.
It does.
So, yes, if you had a camera in my studio, you'd see that. It would be relatively subtle, but absolutely there.
You would see the characters in your physical presence.
Yeah.
I love the way you just described that. And I think the other thing I like about the way this author is telling this story, where we are sometimes in each of their minds talking about the other, is that the heat of this story, the romance of this story is so, it's very physical, but we hear it also in their thoughts. And I guess, I don't know that I've ever thought of romance as feminism, like the genre of it. Do you know what I mean? But I think there was parts of this where I felt like she had a lot of power and agency and voice.
Absolutely. And she's going against the expectations of her as a woman of her time, as a woman of her particular sort of the upper echelons of society. And in that is what kind of then gives her naturally more agency, because she's making choices for herself rather than going, I'll make this choice because society expects them of me. And to kind of link back to what we were saying earlier, that's still so relevant today. I think, women still to a certain extent feel like, I'm expected to be this way because I'm a woman and make these choices, or not make these choices because I'm a woman. So, Bronwyn, in kind of deciding for herself what to do with her body, what to do with her mind, where to put her focus, is such a mark of, of a true feminist, I think, and also of someone who has power and agency.
Yeah. I think it's very sexy.
Oh, it's so sexy.
But it's linked to that, because I feel her being powerful. And there was something about reading through their interactions and these very sexy scenes where, I don't know, I was surprised by that, and I appreciated that. And maybe that's what I've been missing by not reading more romance.
Me too. The romance, the sort of the source in this book really impressed me, because again, I was kind of coming to it not knowing what sort of historical romance it was going to be, and expecting that some of that might just be, purely for our sort of salacious enjoyment. And because those characters are so strongly written, and because we really get into their minds, we understand the depth of attraction, and we understand the barriers and the walls that are around that as well. So as you say, the heat is it's not just about, well-written scenes. It's also about us really kind of understanding the drive between the characters.
He was her brother's friend and a former British undercover agent, a man who would put her in handcuffs without blinking. A different scenario involving restraints, a much naughtier one with rather less clothing, crept into her mind, and she felt her face flame. Did he carry handcuffs? Stop it, stop it, stop it.
That was one of the absolute hooks for me, was like, these scenes are great. These scenes are great storytelling. So I'm here for it.
Yes, and powerful. There's something about her saying what she wants and getting what she wants.
Yeah, we're so on her side for that. Or I was anyway. I hope other people are.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so one of the other clips that we have includes, this is at the beginning of chapter 15, and she arrives in Paris. This is the other thing. I think there's great settings in this book. Like we're in England, then we're in Philadelphia. Now we come to Paris.
There was something about Paris that fired up the senses. Perhaps it was the way the French lived, or the feeling of flamboyance and élan in the air. It didn't feel as stoic or as measured as England. The French did everything with such flair.
Let's start with the fact that I love Paris. I just think it's one of the most exciting and wonderful cities I've ever been in. So when I was doing my initial read of the book and I got to Paris, I was like, oh, fantastic, wonderful. And in Paris, we encounter some characters who they're part of the upper class, but they're a little more sort of towards Bronwyn's side, in that they're sort of out of the bounds of what society expects for them.
This is my dear friend, the Marquis de Tremblay, her Aunt Esther was saying. He's quite a lovely gentleman when he's not flirting with anything in skirt. She frowned. Or trousers. Or any clothing, actually. Bronwyn bit back her horrified giggle. I do not flirt unless it is invited, the Marquis said in charmingly accented English.
And then you've got the Marquis who, you know, he's a bit of a cad, sort of very much enjoying his time about town, but he's also kind of has a heart of gold and helps Bronwyn and understands passion and romance and love. Very French, and sort of very much someone who can watch two people interact and go, oh, I know what's going on between you two. I see it. And you know, he just seemed so colorful and joyful. And, you know, I was pleased when he carried on a little further through the book than I first expected. He's just joy. He's just living and really enjoying it.
It was nice that she wrote characters like that. One of the other spies who works with the Duke is very free. And so I think she's good at writing characters that are thinking for themselves or living sort of outside all of these strict boundaries that we think of for that time period.
And I noticed actually that Lisbeth, who's the spy that works with the Duke, she's about to get her own book.
Oh, wow.
It's not released yet, but I saw that and I was like, oh, great, because I really liked her, you know, because she from the beginning kind of goes, I think there might be more to Bronwyn than meets the eye. And you just get the feeling that, you know, she is a woman's woman. She gets women. She understands. She's lived as well. You know, there's a sort of segue about her early years in Brighton that I kind of thought was quite delicious. and yeah, so I think this is the thing. We encounter these characters that could be just used to move the story forward.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But actually they are in themselves great sort of cast members. You know, I feel like if we were making the movie of this, none of these would be bit parts. They'd all be played by stars because they're fantastic, rich, glorious characters.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I could visualize them as you gave them voice and character. One of the other things that I think you do a great job of is there are, in addition to these heated scenes, which require a certain sort of energy, you also have scenes of danger. They are on a spy mission. They are in mortal danger more than once in the book. And I thought, like, as you prep for that, and you know, once you've prepped the book where it's going, what's happening next, what is that like for you coming into the booth on those days where you're like, okay, this is when they're going to get shot at, or this is when she's going to be injured, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's being in the right headspace for that section of the story. And actually, I will say this is a book that I didn't record the chapters in order.
Oh.
For various reasons, but this is one of those reasons, because I kind of get to a chapter and go, actually that's big and heavy, and there's a sadness to it or a danger to it, and I don't think I'm quite in that space right now, so I'm gonna skip over that and come back to that, which I don't normally do. With most books, I'm going right from chapter 1 to chapter whatever, there we go, you know, that's it. But because, first of all, these chapters they're pretty lengthy, you know, but also because the moods were so specific, it was important to me that if I was like, actually, you know, this is the end of a recording day, so I'm a little more low energy, I'm not going to go in and record a big scene where there's so much action and, you know, fights and danger. I'm going to save that till tomorrow. But you know, I could do a nice scene in the bathtub right now. You know, so that's kind of how I played this book, and one of the ways that I kind of used to sort of be in the right frame of mind to record specific chapters.
It's really interesting. I love that. Let's see, I'm trying to check my notes. I know. There's a little thing the author has done with smell, and she's given the main character a scent, which sounds very like, well, women wear perfume, women have a scent. But what did you think about that?
It's really interesting the way it's done, because this scent kind of annoys the Duke, but it annoys him in that very specific way where he's like, I'm annoyed by that because I like it and I don't want to like it, but I do like it. And then it's sort of threaded through all of the interactions. And again, it just sort of added another dimension, I think, to how we're experiencing these characters and their experience of each other. It's one of the things Bronwyn is not aware of, the effect that her scent has.
Yes, right.
Quite, because she's not in his mind, but we very much are, and so it's sort of a thread of the attraction that, which is another dimension. I think that's this book is just so multi-dimensional in terms of point of view.
It's another sensory, it's another sensory input, literally.
Yeah.
And I loved that it wasn't like gardenias or magnolias or vanilla, or like it was something completely different than what I've heard a woman described as, from a perfume scent. So she has had this soap made that smells like cinnamon and apples and like a kind of tart. And that's beguiling in itself, that it's something different, and she is a different kind of woman. And it's just one more way the author lets us know.
She's unique. She's different. She makes her own choices. She doesn't just get the finest perfume from, the London perfumier. She goes and she has this specific thing made that no one else would wear.
And then it's in her soap. It's in what she bathes in. It's what her clothes are washed out of. So then it sort of becomes part of who she is. And it was just a note that I made. That was like, what a clever technique by the author. And also just fun that it was this cinnamon apple dessert. And at the very end of the book, I don't know, did you get a physical copy of the book as well?
No, actually, it's always been on my Kindle. It's where I keep almost all my books. Yeah.
So in the physical book at the end, there's a recipe for the Marlborough pie. Isn't that clever?
How wonderful. That's gorgeous.
Yes. Isn't it clever? And a brief history of how it was this apple custard dessert that goes all the way back to the 1600s. It's been in British cookbooks and American cookbooks. And I love when authors have extra treats for their readers. And really, even her author's note is full of, where she found these inspirational points in history and her sort of explanation for why she does things the way she does. Like, she uses some modern language to explain race. She avoids words that are not in our vocabulary anymore, out of respect for what the weight that those words carry in other ways. And so
the research and the choices and that level of tact and sensitivity, and the brain, I think, that she has to tell this story from what feels, as I say, like a very authentic historical point of view, but with a modern mindset and a modern awareness, is just beautiful. It's
really fun. I'm glad that she's continuing the series. The other notes that I had, the other notes I had about you were circus and puppetry, your other loves. You want to talk a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I mean, I come from an acting background, and as part of that, I've done a lot of very physical work. Ended up through the physical work learning aerial circus and joining Cirque du Soleil for 4 years. I actually joined as a puppeteer, ended up doing aerial in the show as well. So I did a 4-year world tour with them, and those two strands, the aerial work and the puppetry, sort of always sit so close to my heart. I don't really perform circus now, but I do coach it, and I absolutely play with puppets all the time. I've just made a puppet movie that I'm a little puppet short that I'll be showing later this month. I mean, my focus right now is very much on kind of classic acting, so screen acting, video game acting, and narrating. But that element of my performance life is very much sort of always at the forefront of my mind anyway. So
yeah, I I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to actually talk to someone that performed with Cirque du Soleil. Like, I'm a little starstruck by that when I read that in your bio.
Oh,
because I think I can remember taking our kids to see a performance that was traveling. And it came to Denver literally under a big tent. They set up a huge circus.
yeah, a big top show.
And we had really good seats. And I don't know what I was expecting, but it took my breath away. The entire performance was my jaw was just the entire time. And I remember even telling the kids, like, how are these people? How are the performers not everyday household names? Like, the level of skill and artistry and physical ability, and yet they were all just part of a collective. They were all anonymous in that. And maybe I'm naive about that. Maybe there are like really famous Cirque du Soleil performers, but to me, it felt like it was this collective group of artists.
Well, circus, no, you're right, because circus is such a collaborative art form. Even if you have a solo act, that act has been coached by someone, they've worked with other people, they've taken inspiration from other people. And, the circus, the sort of traditional circus is very much a family, sometimes literally a family. And I think that culture of family and collaboration and that sort of feeling that we're all in this together sort of lives on in my experience of circus now. So, your vision of sort of saying, well, people aren't sort of individuals, they're all part of this team is very much part of the culture of circus.
Yes, because I remember leaving thinking, like, how are they not all immensely famous? How is this not, which I imagine in some ways they really are. Like you said, a world tour, 4 years in a row, there's an audience everywhere, right? Like, there's people just aching to see that kind of show and showmanship. It was just, it was also just, it was a combination of things that was unexpected to me. It was this sort of the wow factor of gymnastics, right? Like the wow factor of, did you know the human body could do that?
Yeah.
But also the set design and the puppetry that you're explaining, the physical presence of everything there on stage.
I think what's unique about Cirque du Soleil, and all of the shows that come under that very wide banner, is that Cirque du Soleil is so good at storytelling. Now, some of the shows are more narrative driven, some less so. But even in the less narrative driven shows that are more sort of, back-to-back acts, the acts are telling us a story. They're setting a mood, they're setting a scene. We're going into a world. And that's where, actually, although Cirque du Soleil narrating seem quite far apart, actually they dovetail quite neatly. And one of the reasons I loved being a performer with Cirque is that every night I got to tell this story on stage, or be a part of telling this story on stage. And we were always seeking better ways to tell the story. And although the easy way is, in circus, the easy way is with a bigger trick or a bigger act, but it's, how does that trick become part of this world, this story, this thing that the audience are experiencing?
I also remember, and I feel this way in a lot of live performances, I think it was what I most was sad and missed during COVID. There's a moment in almost every live performance where it's not loud and big, it's intimate and tiny, and you can hear a pin drop. Right? Because everyone's focus in these huge auditoriums suddenly are enraptured.
And that's the beauty of that live experience, the collective experience, that we kind of connect as human beings in those moments. In that moment of silence, when we're all holding our breath, we're all waiting for the pin to drop. We know that there's, thousands of other people having a similar parallel experience to us. And it makes us kind of remember the connections that we have with our fellow human beings that aren't always direct, they're not always spoken about, they don't always need reflecting on. We just go, oh, we're all in this together,
Yes. When you walk out of a theater and everyone is just, oh, that moment, oh, that,
Yeah.
that sort of the energy afterwards is, or that you're still crying. You're still crying as you walk out because it was so emotional. Yes.
Yeah. It's very bonding. It brings us together. That's why live performance is so important, I think. Or one of the reasons why it's so important, that it's very difficult to have those experiences, remotely always. So.
And I actually do think that's why during COVID, the audio storytelling experience sort of took off, right? Because there is an intimacy to a storyteller in your ear, just you and that storyteller.
Yeah.
That mirrors that a little, that you feel like you're having a moment with that story, with that person in your ear. There's an intimacy to it that fed some of that need, I think, when we were cut off so much, and continues to. I think that's why it's such a growing field.
Absolutely. And it's almost, I think, with audiobooks, it's almost becomes another character in the story that you're experiencing, because you have the characters there that are being written about, or the stories are playing out. And then you also get this other point of view to a certain extent, which is the narrator giving you his or her take on how this story is told, and the world of the characters. And I think that's a really beautiful addition to an experience of a book, that you have the author, you have what he or she has written, and then you have this narrator who's also giving you, something else to experience about this world.
Yeah. I've heard from several authors that when they listen to the audiobook, it's almost like they're not listening to their story. Like it has been translated into another thing. And that it's otherworldly or out of body, kind of like, because the narrator does bring their energy, their person. It becomes another component in the listener, the writer, the narrator, sort of collectively. Yeah.
We see that echoed across different art forms. It's, in circus, there might be a certain number of people that can do this trick, but that person does it that way. That person does it that way. It's unique. And with or in dance, the choreographer's given the steps, but these specific dancers will dance them in a slightly subtly nuanced different way. And it's the same thing with narration. Another person could narrate the Duke in question, and you'd get a different take on it, same words, but it would be a different take. And that's a gorgeous thing, and something I think that is very special about narration, and the honor of actually narrating a specific book. It's always an honor to go, I'm going to voice these words. It's very special.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay, you've been super generous. The last thing I always ask comes back to the title of the podcast. I called it Desideratum, which literally means an essential thing. When I was growing up, my parents had this poem they hung on the wall called Desiderata.
Yeah, I used to have it on my wall. Go placidly amid the noise and the haste.
Yes.
And remember what peace there may be in silence. Yes. That came right back from childhood.
Well, it was one of those things, it was a touchstone that they had hanging up. So when I was trying to think of what to contribute to the podcast space, I knew I wanted to talk to storytellers and people that bring story to life, and that I wanted to go beyond just a review of the story and talk about essential things and things that are essential to being human and being a storyteller. So I always like to ask, for you, if someone says, Helen, what is most essential? What do you think is essential? How do you answer?
Well, that's such a good, deep, delicious question. The thing that springs to mind is having things in your life that you feel passion about, not just like, love, yes, but things that light you up. I know, I'm very lucky in that I felt passionate about performance and storytelling from a very young age. And I've always kind of looked at, when I was growing up, kind of looked at people that didn't really know what they wanted to do and felt a bit foxed by that and gone, oh no, that's awful. You must find something. And, I think having things that set you on fire, those are the things, that's what comes to mind as the most essential. And not deliberately wanting to loop it back to the Duke in question, but I do think that's what Bronwyn has in bucket loads. She has things that set her on fire that she really wants to fight for and that are essentials.
I love it. As soon as you said passion, I thought, what perfect answer for my day to cover a romance book.
Right?
Yes. And I do think you're right about the character. It's been really fun talking to you about it. I'm so grateful.
Likewise.
I hope you enjoyed getting to know narrator Helen Day, who performed the Duke in question as Hedra Knight, as much as I did. I want to thank the Colorado Sun for shining their light on Amalie Howard's work. I listen to the daily Sun Up podcast, and on Sundays I check out the SunLit features on authors put together by SunLit editor Kevin Simpson. You can check it out at coloradosun.org, or look for the Daily Sun Up wherever you found this podcast. The Duke in question was a Colorado Book Award finalist in the romance category. I love that Colorado Humanities celebrates storytellers in my home state. You can find the winners and finalists in all the genre categories at coloradohumanities.org. A big thank you to author Amalie Howard, narrator Helen Day, reading as Hedra Knight, and all the fine folks at Dreamscape Media for bringing the Duke in question audiobook to life and sponsoring this episode. Dreamscape Media's catalog includes best-selling audiobooks, children's educational videos, prominent independent authors, and much, much more. They strive to publish and distribute titles that both inspire and entertain listeners, readers, and viewers around the world. I'm honored that they support this podcast, and I hope you'll connect with them. Please visit them at dreamscapepublishing.com, where you should sign up for their weekly newsletter that has audiobook news, deals, and giveaways. I'll put links to everyone I thanked in the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening.